Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on momentum behind the Separatist movement. But first, big dollar borrowing.
It is simply used as an overdraft to make sure that we are able to go into the business of selling products that producers give us to sell.
The Energy Minister on a recent order in Council authorizing the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission to borrow up to $900 million, part of a plan to collect oil sands royalties by taking bitumen instead of dollars, oil it will then take to market. Joining us now, Richard Masson, an Executive Fellow with the University of Calgary School of Public Policy, former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. Richard, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Great to be here, Michael.
All right. Well, maybe as a starting point, what would warrant the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission needing to borrow up to $900 million?
Well, I've been thinking about this for a few days, and I was involved in the Bitumen Royalty in Kind initiative over a decade ago. And at that time, we looked at how complex it was going to be and decided it didn't make a lot of sense. And at the time, the reason for doing that was because they wanted to support the development of the Northwest Upgrader, which has become known as the Sturgeon Refinery. They recognized that what that required was a 30-year take-or-pay tolling agreement so that agreement could underpin borrowing by the partnership to get it built. And they didn't need to actually take the bitumen royalties in kind to do that. They could just buy diluted bitumen on the market, bring it to the refinery, have it processed, pay the toll, make diesel, and send the profit or loss back to the government. So that's been working that way for years. And there's really, in my mind, not a good reason to implement bitumen royalty in kind in the sense of a different way to acquire bitumen to market, because APMC is quite capable of buying bitumen in the market, putting it on a pipeline if they want, and selling it someplace else. They could do that right now with no issue. So then you look at the order in council, and what it says is they could borrow this $900 million for hydrocarbon marketing activities, and those include providing loans, loan guarantees, doing joint ventures, or setting up subsidiary corporations. That doesn't really sound like an overdraft at all. And so it seems to me that this is really more likely about backstopping a proponent for a Northwest BC pipeline.
Oh, okay, so the provincial government then may be backstopping a pipeline project. How necessary is that to lock in private sector proponents at this stage? How does that play into the memorandum of understanding that has already been signed with the federal government?
Well, the Memorandum of Understanding requires, essentially Alberta would be the proponent in the early stage of this, which I think most people thought meant right now they put $14 million towards kind of a super high level feasibility study. But everybody I think is anticipating that a private sector proponent would step up to carry it the rest of the way, because certainly Alberta doesn't have the technical or, it's not a pipeline company. It doesn't know how to do that. So they need some private sector proponent to step up. But likely what's happened is the private sector proponents have just looked at the level of risk and said, we're not going to put our money into it. And the only way that we would do it is if somebody is prepared to backstop us with a loan guarantee or loans or something like that. The MOU requires that the pipeline be privately financed, not government money. So this could be in a gray zone, but it's certainly, I don't think, what people were expecting or hoping for when the MOU was signed.
What degree of risk could that then put taxpayers in? Because essentially this debt would be taxpayer dollars, would it not, if the government goes ahead and backstops a privately driven pipeline?
Absolutely. And in the older days, we didn't have pipeline companies asking for backstopping. They just put their own money in, took the risk because they were confident they'd be able to deliver a pipeline that producers would back with long-term tolling agreements. But since Energy East and Keystone XL and Northern Gateway, it's very, very risky. In fact, Enbridge said they lost $600 million on the feasibility part of the Northern Gateway project. They had done routing, they had done geotechnical, they had done the consultation, they had structured agreements, impact benefit agreements with First Nations, gone through the regulatory process, all those things. It took them years, and they had put $600 million into it when it was finally canceled. That's the kind of effort it takes to build a pipeline. And so that's all going to happen again in order for a Northwest BC pipeline or any BC pipeline to get built. And it's likely that $900 million figure would be mostly required, to backstop all the effort it would take.
All right, if we bring this back full circle to the bitumen royalties in kind program, and the government then in turn selling that oil into the marketplace, for the government to do this, what degree of benefit do you see it ultimately bringing to Albertans? At the end of the day, does that program make sense?
All the companies who produce from the oil sands market their barrels, and they get the market price, right? So they do their best to maximize their revenue, negotiating with marketing companies, negotiating with refiners. And then once they get that sale done, Alberta gets its share of the market price oil in cash. And so effectively we have 15 or 20 companies marketing the Alberta royalty barrels with long established relationships and teams who know what they're doing. So it's hard to quantify any benefit of Alberta setting up a new team at Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission with no tanks or no pipeline agreements in place to try to do better than that. And that's where it gets, pretty tricky. Like, what's the point of this? If it's just to try and make a profit on marketing, it's hard to see how that would work. If it's to try to say we need to be able to send oil to some place like India on a long-term basis, well, that's a very specific deal, not a general program. And even if that was something you wanted to do, you could probably work with a private sector proponent to get that done without APMC taking it over. So it's really unclear why the government is going down this path at this time. And certainly it was hard for us at the time 10 years ago to see a benefit of.
All right. Yeah, well, lots there to process. Really appreciate getting your perspective on this evening, Richard. As always, thank you, sir.
Take care.
Richard Masson is an executive fellow with the University of Calgary School of Public Policy and former CEO of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. From a move to authorize big dollar borrowing to momentum behind the separatist cause and the resumption of Parliament. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Sarah Elder, founder of the political fashion brand Madam Premier, host of the Briefing Note podcast and a former political staffer. And John Santos is a political analyst. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Alberta government going ahead with its bitumen royalties in kind program and the move to authorize the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission to borrow up to $900 million. Sarah, we heard from industry insider Richard Masson off the top. What do you make of the assessment of how those dollars might be used and how that fits with the direction of the Smith government?
Here's what I would like from the Smith government. I would like them to communicate what is really driving this to Albertans so that we can have a better understanding of what their motivation is, what their direction is, and what the end result is. Because I don't necessarily think that we have the level of transparency that we need to be able to understand what this ability to borrow up to $900 million can do. That's a significant amount of money. Is it because they want to take us in the direction of Norway? Are we, the marketing of this, if we're taking the risk on, why would this not possibly be done through another vessel? Why are we acting as a middleman almost in taking product and then selling it ourselves? If it's about market access, then our job as government, in my mind, should be about opening up those markets. That's a function of the minister's office, in my mind, of going out and having those conversations and talking to stakeholders and trying to get our product to market, not actually being the owner of the product ourselves, because then we are actually going to be in competition potentially with private sector companies. I have a lot of questions, and I hope Albertans do too. And so I would really like it for the minister to get out in front of this and explain it in more detail.
John, how do you see this playing at a time when there are concerns over Alberta's finances? Well, oil prices have not been the greatest of late.
Yeah, taking on more debt burdens certainly would not be something that most Albertans are probably looking to do. On the other hand, I mean, if we sort of look at, the fact that governments typically should not get into business if there's a private sector option, but if the private sector cannot accomplish things that need to be done, then, I mean, that is a legitimate place for government to step in. And so, I mean, maybe this could help if it does help secure a private sector proponent. But, I mean, pipeline companies have already been burned in the past. The Alberta taxpayer has been burned in the past in terms of public money that was essentially lit on fire for Keystone that never amounted to anything. And so there is a lot of risk here. And I think the public is going to be reticent, even those people who are, very in support of pipelines might be thinking, like, do we necessarily want to get burned and light up to $900 million on fire again?
Sarah, if it is that this borrowing is to backstop a private sector proponent to build a pipeline, how do you see that element landing with Albertans?
I mean, as someone who supports the MOU, who is pro oil and gas, pro development, as someone whose family is connected. My husband works in the oil and gas sector. We benefit. Every single Albertan benefits. Every single Canadian benefits from our oil and gas sector. Here's what I would like, and I don't know why this seems to be a fraught issue for so many governments. I just want them to tell us the state of where we are. Tell us about what your plans are to lead us through this really tumultuous time. Just, broad strokes, doesn't have to be nitty-gritty details about everything that's going on, but tell us what the plan is. We can take it. We all get it. We understand what's at stake, so that we can be on board and we can be advocates for the oil and gas sector ourselves. I think that is something that I would like to see change, is that each Albertan has the ability to actually be an advocate for our energy sector as well. Make us those advocates. Make us so when we go out and we have conversations and we're traveling and we're talking to people and having conversations at the hockey rink, that this is what we're talking about and that we are all on the same page. That is what I would like to have happen.
All right. Next up, the Big Four Roadhouse at Stampede Park in Calgary, playing host Monday evening to one of the largest Stay Free Alberta referendum petition signing events.
People making new friends, Albertans working together. All we need to do is keep doing that until the 6th of May, right? And we get our 1.8 million signatures, and we get Alberta the hell out of Canada.
Speakers addressing supporters stated the relationship with Ottawa is over and that the path to independence is unstoppable. Thousands said to have signed the petition through the day in Calgary to move this to a referendum on separation, possibly as early as the fall. The group will need to collect nearly 178,000 signatures. Organizers say they are well on their way. John, what's to be made of a gathering of that size in Calgary for an independence rally?
I can appreciate that the diehard Federalists are quite alarmed and that the hardcore Separatists are very buoyed by that. But I don't know if I personally would make that much of an event getting, a few thousand people in a city of 1.5 million. I mean, it's a hot topic. There certainly are supporters of it in Alberta, in Calgary. And so I wouldn't read too much into that. I'm not saying that the petition or possible referendum it would eventually succeed. I certainly think it's in the realm of possibility, but I don't know if just an event happening in a city of 1.5 million with a few thousand people attending is necessarily an indication of one, massive amounts of momentum, and two, the eventual success of their separation efforts.
Sarah, on the last topic, you spoke about Albertans needing to hear from the government. So what comes now of political dialogue around this initiative? How much pressure do you see building on the Premier, members of her government, to publicly address where they stand on the issue of separation?
I mean, this feeds into what my hope is in terms of the story, that the message that we hear from our provincial government here in Alberta, but also what I think is like an absence of leadership and story from the federal government in terms of where we are as a nation as well. I want people to meet the moment. I want politicians and political parties to meet the moment and essentially just give a state of either a state of the province or a state of Canada kind of type address. Something that actually kind of looks a lot like what American presidents do, because I think that's the consequence of this moment, and where we are really needs that. And I feel like we're all just kind of going along, but we don't know actually what the real direction is. I don't think that the Alberta Separatist movement is going to be successful. That being said, we absolutely have to understand why that sentiment exists in Alberta and, hear people out, work together on it. And we're one province, I believe, stronger in Canada. Where's the leadership? I want someone to lead us. This is the moment, and you will be rewarded politically for it.
And maybe as a quick final question before we go to break, John, what do you expect to come of members of the Trump administration now openly talking about an independent Alberta?
I think they're going to continue doing what they're doing. It benefits them to have Albertans and Canadians divided. This is a standard playbook of the great powers in the world. This is interfering, if not directly, then indirectly in what's happening in other countries, and they're going to continue to do just that, because sowing the seeds of division bears fruit for them. And I think Albertans need to be on guard for that. And there's only so much in terms of monitoring of the behind-the-scenes things that could be going on that Alberta is able to do. And I think Albertans need to be very vigilant in terms of staying on top of the messages, not just from official channels in the United States, but unofficial channels through social media, the network of memes that promote these things, that sort of thing.
All right. We need to take a quick break, but when we come back, the resumption of Parliament, could it be paving the way to an early election? More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. MPs are now back in the House of Commons as the sitting resumes, and the Carney government is pushing out a new plan to help low-income Canadians.
These payments make up for the higher level of food prices since the pandemic.
As part of the plan, the government renaming the GST credit the Canada Groceries and Essentials Benefit, raising it by 25% for 5 years. There will be an additional one-time payment this year, with the average family of four receiving nearly $2,000, followed by $1,400 in each of the following 4 years. The measure expected to help 12 million low to modest income Canadians. Conservatives say they will support the move as long as other spending is not added on. Sarah, there are some who say that grocery store announcement had the feel of a campaign event. To what degree do you see the Carney government building to an early election?
I think it's within the realm of possibilities, depending on what happens with President Trump in the United States. I think that could be a game changer in terms of he's just so unpredictable and causing so much consternation amongst Canadians and politicians alike. So I would say there's a chance of it, but I think that the affordability measures announced by the Carney government are long overdue. I think that spreading it out over 5 years is not the relief that Canadians need now. And I believe that it's up to an income level of about $70,000. A lot more Canadians are actually struggling who make even more. $100,000 income is not what it used to be. And so I think it's a good starting point, but I think it actually misses the mark in terms of truly addressing the affordability crisis in Canada.
John, also Monday, Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the Prime Minister, they met in Toronto. There's certainly been some tensions in that relationship in the wake of the recent trade mission to China. But how do you see that meeting playing into Thursday's scheduled get-together between the PM and First Ministers in Ottawa?
I think it's important for Mark Carney to demonstrate to his caucus his ability to keep key players in Canada on side, and I think that's part of why that meeting happened. That meeting also happened because he needs to regularly check in with premiers, and Ford himself said that he was a bit blindsided by the trade deal announcement with China, and so it's important to check in after those kinds of surprises. That said, I don't think anybody should be surprised that Ford and Carney were able to bury the hatchet and move on as quickly as they do. They are sort of natural allies, in terms of the political situation that we're in. Lest we forget, Ontario has a history of electoral balancing, and so it likes to have different parties in power at the federal and provincial level. So from a purely strategic calculation perspective, it actually benefits Doug Ford to have a Liberal PM in Ottawa, and certainly a Liberal PM whose policy goals are aligned with his. And so, yeah, I think that's just business as usual, and them continuing to try and get things done. But it certainly does help both Premier Ford and Prime Minister Carney in terms of managing the internal dynamics and internal politics with which they have to contend.
Sarah, looking at the other side of the aisle with the House now sitting, how critical a week is this for Pierre Poilievre ahead of this weekend's leadership review in Calgary?
I think it's going to be, an interesting few days. I think that a lot of federal Conservative politicians are already arriving in Calgary. So, unless there's another floor crossing or some kind of pronouncement from Trump, I think it's kind of a light week. But I think that this weekend and the convention in Calgary for Pierre Poilievre is going to be a really, really important place for him to understand if he has the support of the party, and also get a read on what's happening here in Alberta. I was at an event last night, actually, that was attended by Premier Danielle Smith, hosted by the Ontario Federal Conservative MP Jamil Javani. And she, the level of disagreement and agreement within on different things, it's a really interesting time. I don't know how to really put a lid on it, except to say that the federal Conservatives want to take back Calgary Confederation, and we'll have to see if that's a possibility and if they're able to do that.
All right, John, all of the 20 seconds left for you. What does Pierre Poilievre need to accomplish in these next few days?
He needs to show that he continues to still have a grip on the party, and that there is no heir apparent, and that there are no challengers that are looking to take his job. Plain and simple as that. And I think he will come away from the weekend unscathed, so I'll be watching to see if there's anyone setting themselves up to be Poilievre's successor. All
right, but we have to leave it there. We're out of time. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Good to be here.
Thanks.
That is our program for tonight. Remember, you can always have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, while MPs are now back in Parliament, focus will soon shift to Pierre Poilievre's leadership review. We'll hear from a Conservative strategist on the weekend ahead. That's on Wednesday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone. From all of us at Alberta Primetime, thank you for watching, and join us again next time.